This is Latitude at Frontline. I'm Nirupama Subramanian, the host of this show. As India reels from the shock of the Trump tariffs, China is the new flavor of the season. Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, was in Delhi for 2 days earlier this week. Wang Yi's visit came after visits by External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and National Security Advisor Doval to China in July. These were the first India-China high-level visits since the military standoff in eastern Ladakh in 2020. On August 30th, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also visit China to participate in the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization at Tianjin. Internationally and at home, the analysis is that the US President Donald Trump has pushed India into China's embrace. What is India getting out of this engagement? Are its core issues being addressed? What is driving Chinese engagement with India? And what does this India-China re-engagement mean in the wider geopolitical context? To find out more about all this, my guest today is Ashok Kantha, was India's ambassador to Beijing from 2014 to 2016. After his retirement from the government, he was director of the Institute of Chinese Studies and is now associated with the Vivekananda Foundation as Honorary Fellow. And he's a highly respected commentator on India-China relations. Welcome to Latitude, Ambassador Kantha.
Thank you, Nirupama. Thanks for inviting me.
Can we start by talking about Wang Yi's visit? A 10-point agreement was signed. One agreement is that the two sides will keep a political perspective of the overall bilateral relationship while seeking a settlement of the boundary question. In accordance with the 2005 agreement on political parameters and guiding principles for settlement of the India-China boundary question. It's quite a mouthful. What is the significance of this? What does it mean? Is it a shift from an earlier held position?
Well, Nirupama, first on the visit of Foreign Minister Wang Yi to India, it was an important visit and it was part of a process which commenced when Prime Minister met with President Xi Jinping at Kazan, Russia, in October last year. You referred to other high-level visits from India. There was also a visit of Defense Minister that was also in context of SCO.
Right.
Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit, as you mentioned, has resulted in a 10-point understanding. Two sides are trying to rebuild relations, but simultaneously, as there was a meeting between special representatives of India and China on the boundary question, I think an effort is being made to impart greater momentum to our discussions on border-related issues, possibly that emerges out of recognition that given developments since summer of 2020, you can't really sort of disregard the border issue, which has come back to center stage of relations. There are several important initiatives there. The most important, of course, is one regarding early harvest on the border issue. Now, this is something we need to understand. There is a reaffirmation of agreement on political parameters and guiding principles for boundary settlement, which was signed in April 2005. And that envisages a political settlement, proceeding from overall relations and not just a settlement based on, technical legalities.
Now, in that sense, sorry to interrupt, in that sense, is that something that India has accepted, that the border question will be discussed along with all other issues, whereas earlier the Indian position was, unless the border is normalized in the wake of the Ladakh incidents, that unless the border situation goes back to status quo ante, we can't really discuss other aspects of the of our relationship. Whereas the Chinese always maintain that, well, this is the border issue is a long and complicated thing, and we have to focus on our overall relationship, and border question we will sort out by and by. So, in that sense, is this a shift?
Uh, well, the position we took that, restoration of peace and tranquility in border areas is an essential prerequisite for moving ahead with relations in other spheres. And at present, assessment of Government of India appears to be that there is greater stability along India-China borders. Borders are more peaceful now. So I think that dual track approach is being adopted while we are making progress on what we call people centric and we added this time economic engagement between two countries and that is being done in a calibrated fashion. In parallel, we are addressing both boundary question, which is settlement of boundary issue, and maintenance of peace and tranquility in border, which is border management. On boundary settlement, uh, early harvest causes some sort of anxieties, frankly. This is not a new proposal. It had been broached by the Chinese side earlier also, and that was specifically in context of Sikkim. And at that time, we had pointed out that the agreement of 2005, we referred to earlier, envisages a package settlement covering all sectors of India-China boundary, and that going for a piecemeal approach limited only to Sikkim will not serve much purpose. So we had not, accepted that position. There was some discussion on can we, as part of overall settlement, look at Sikkim plus middle sector, address both of them together. I don't know what is the connotation of early harvest this time, but what we have seen that this task is being delegated to an expert group under WMCC. Secretary level on our side and Director General Boundary Affairs on the Chinese side. Uh, this is, you know, a little surprising because when you're talking about political settlement, understanding always has been that will be discussed between special representatives. When we're negotiating agreement on political parameters and guiding principles, uh, but now if we are discussing uh, at official level, have we agreed on the basis for early harvest? Because Chinese, in fact, if you look at their readout, it talks about border demarcation in sectors which are ripe for settlement. Now, that's again confusing because border demarcation was meant to be absolutely the last stage
The last point.
in the process. Process was three-step. First, this agreement, which we have concluded. Second, a framework for boundary settlement, which will essentially involve give and take, adjustments in our respective positions. And third was meant to be delineation on map and demarcation ground. How can we start straight away going to demarcation? That's not consistent with 2005 agreement. Our readout also refers to border delimitation. Now, this term is not used anywhere. We talked about delineation and demarcation. So this is one, we are I'm little, sort of confused here. Secondly, if it's confined to Sikkim sector, then clearly we have nothing to gain there because watershed boundary is already agreed. Uh, but there are issues relating to tri-junction point in particular. India, China, Bhutan tri-junction. Obviously, we cannot discuss it bilaterally only because Bhutan is also a party for discussion of tri-junction. And there are some other complications. I don't want to go into that. To my mind, position taken earlier are not to take up Sikkim alone for early harvest was a very uh, good, sound position, and we should not move away from that. If we want to include middle sector also, there are more serious difficulties there which cannot be resolved. Boundary issue and on a line to line of actual control. So that's something I don't think can be resolved at the official level. So first, I'm not sure what's the scope of early harvest, whether it will be limited to Sikkim sector. That's the case. It's not desirable. Will it include middle sector also? We don't know it. So this is one on early harvest. Second, important issue is de-escalation. And I'm happy to see that we are starting with discussions on principles of de-escalation. That's a very sensible approach to adopt because earlier also 1996, we had agreement on military confidence building measures. We had agreed that ceilings on deployment of troops in specific areas will be determined, take to account parameters like border infrastructure, nature of terrain, and most importantly, time taken to induct and de-induct troops. So we cannot have numerical equivalence because China has advantage in all these areas. So I think those things need to be resolved. Uh, then border management, this is an ongoing exercise. To my mind, an important issue which should not be left out is what you initially mentioned, restoration status quo ante. Our chief army staff has referred to it on more than one occasion in public domain that we would like things to go back to as position as in April 2020. We still have, the so-called buffer zones, which involve restrictions on patrolling by our troops and grazing by our herdsmen in areas they were visiting until April, May 2020. So I think that needs to be set right.
So, but the understanding of the buffer zones, in the Indian establishment circles, people that I have spoken to, including on this program, it seems to be that while these buffer zones were carved out of area that India had claimed, that India had claims on or has claims on, China had also claimed the same areas. So if Indian troops cannot patrol there, nor can the Chinese. So in a sense, it has affected both sides equally. Would you agree with that view?
Well, I don't want to go to specific pockets here.
Yeah.
One, factor is that we don't have full visibility on what has been agreed. Details have never been made public. But point is that there were pockets where there was overlapping patrolling, and you have to look at what is extent of buffer zone. Extent of buffer zone, to my mind, essentially largely areas which we were patrolling. And they were, our graziers were going there, Chinese graziers were not coming there. So these areas, access has been denied now.
Yeah, the glaciers are not being allowed to go there now.
So I think that needs to be, even troops, in fact, some areas, I can understand that there will be overlapping patrolling. But, our, we are not preventing Chinese from patrolling areas which we believe fall on our side of line of actual control. In Pankung area, for instance, there are pockets in Depsang, there are pockets where they are still coming, even though we believe that they are on our side of line of actual control. So I think this was referred to by Minister External Affairs in a statement in Parliament on the 3rd and 4th December last year as steps of a limited and temporary nature. So I'll underline the word temporary. Limited, I don't know because I'm not aware of facts of disengagement. But this temporariness should not be allowed to become permanent because that will impact, our position on LAC. And this will also amount to letting Chinese get away with their usual stance of incremental gains, which they are doing, their grey zone operations elsewhere also. So this is something that we need to keep alive on agenda of dialogue with China. As you look at the behavior in South China Sea, for instance, what they have done. They keep creating new normal situations, which becomes basis for more action, more military and coercive action. So situation over a period of time changes. You look at the China-Bhutan border, what has happened there. Situation has changed very, very significantly. We shouldn't fall into that trap, that position.
The other thing about the agreement is that the Chinese readout on Taiwan and the subsequent rejoinder by the Ministry of External Affairs that India, it seems to suggest that India came under some pressure to declare that Taiwan is a part of China. And the MEA has refuted the Chinese claim that Mr. Jaishankar said Taiwan is a part of China, which the Chinese readout was claiming. Mr. Doval said India had always adhered to the one China policy. We do have a one China policy, but we had stopped reiterating this as we used to at one point for nearly 2 decades now, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps from
2009 onwards, we are
9 onwards.
Yeah.
And because the Chinese were issuing staple visas on to people from Jammu and Kashmir and Arunachal Pradesh. So that was our response to those staple visas. So should we be coming under pressure to make these reiterations on one China without reciprocal guarantees from the Chinese on Kashmir and Arunachal?
Clearly, the Chinese side has been putting pressure on the issue of some kind of statement coming from India on Taiwan being part of China and one China, principle. There's a reason why we have decided not to reiterate, one China principle. You referred to staple visas, etc. There's also concern that uh, when it comes to Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, China is engaging in activities, including undertaking large projects, which completely, go against our, territorial integrity and sovereignty. So we have been telling them that, look, it can't be one-sided, that we keep reiterating one China principle or policy, and from your side, you do things which undermine our, sovereignty and territorial integrity. In fact, I recall that the first meeting, in fact, India government had in June 2014, when Mr. Wangi was foreign minister at that time also. He had come to India and had a very substantive meeting with then Minister of External Affairs, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj. And she conveyed very clearly that, if you expect us to refer to one China policy, then you must respect the one India policy also. we have our own concerns. If you have to, so it was conveyed. It's not, it's not something which we have been ducking. We have been responding to it in upfront manner. Now, this time, what seems to have happened? Clearly, we didn't agree to any statement from our side, either on Taiwan being part of China or one China uh, policy. So what they did, readouts coming from Chinese side, readout on Mr. Wang Yi's meeting with Minister External Affairs, refers to our accepting Taiwan being part of China. Likewise, readout on Mr. Wang Yi's meeting with National Security Advisor refers to our sort of reiterating adherence to one China policy. We were constrained. Minister of External Affairs very rightly issued a clarification same day, and saying that there's no change in our policy, and explain in some detail our policy on Taiwan. Therefore, yesterday there is a rejoinder which is very sharp coming from a spokesperson of Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which says that Chinese side is surprised by the so-called clarification, which is inconsistent with the facts. And it adds that it would seem that some people in India have tried to undermine China's sovereignty on the Taiwan question and impede improvement of China-India relations. China has serious concern and firmly opposes that. And it goes on to give this advice. We hope that India will earnestly abide by the one China principle, handle sensitive issues, properly handle sensitive issues, and promote steady development of bilateral relations. So you can see that from their side, the pushback has been very strong, and they could have allowed clarification to stay. They have not done that. They have come back with a strong rejoinder. So this is where we stand now.
So what does this mean? Is it just grandstanding on
No,
side?
it's not grandstanding. There's a very clear message that when it comes to their sensitivities, they are going to convey their views bluntly, uh, frankly, and in upfront manner. And the lesson that we need to learn from that, that what we don't need to sort of underplay, downplay our own sensitivities. It's a complex relationship which can be taken forward despite an honest and frank dialogue on issues that divide us.
Which brings me really to the next question. Indian officials have spoken publicly about the help rendered by China to Pakistan during Operation Sindhu. And it's been very detailed that about the aircraft, about the intelligence and real-time inputs and so on and so forth. But India has not been able to take up this issue with China at all, or at least that is not in the public domain. And it seems that it hasn't come up in these conversations with Mr. Wang Yi. And instead, what has happened is Mr. Wang Yi from Delhi, he has gone to Islamabad after a stopover in Kabul. It was almost like China is telling India, cope. We have this relationship, cope with it. So, did we have a choice of bringing this up? Should we have done so?
Nirupama, I'm not aware whether this was brought up or not, but this is a very serious concern. You would have seen comments made by Deputy Chief of Army Staff on a kind of battlefield collusion that we saw between China and Pakistan during 4-day, hostilities we had with Pakistan. This was unprecedented, and this is a matter of very serious concern for us because it changes. We are not just dealing with Pakistan as one theater, but we are dealing with an extended theater where China will be a key participant, not necessarily getting involved explicitly or directly in military operations, but providing all kind of support to Pakistan, which in today's multi-domain network-centric warfare becomes very important. So, to my mind, our concerns should be articulated and conveyed both privately in discussions through diplomatic channels, which I hope has been done, and publicly articulated. The way Chinese have publicly articulated their views on Taiwan. I just mentioned their rejoinder
Yeah.
to MEA clarification. This needs to be done. And, a visit to Kabul also was not just a sort of uh, create a gap between visits to New Delhi and Islamabad. Kabul, there was a meeting, trilateral meeting of foreign ministers of China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, where Afghanistan was again invited to join China Pakistan Economic Corridor, so called China Pakistan Economic Corridor. Now you are aware of our views on China Pakistan Economic Corridor. That's another thing which impinges on certain core interests. I'm using this term because Chinese love using this term, core interests of India. So we cannot disregard. Then he goes to Pakistan. They're aware of our sensitivities about visits to India and Pakistan being organized like this. So there's a message there. We should take note of that message. I don't think we need to get too worried about it. But point is that we should not be in a state of denial about certain unpalatable facts in India-China relations. I would strongly recommend that, as Prime Minister conveyed to Foreign Minister Wang Yi, we must seek stable, predictable, and constructive relations with China. But that has to be forced on the basis of acknowledgement of facts. And we should not have illusions. It's good that we are sort of focusing on border related issues. That's a good development. But this needs to be thought through very carefully. Likewise, on other issues, you have a question of this large Chinese hydropower project coming up in immediate vicinity of India, which has very serious downstream impact on India in different areas, water flows, environment, disaster, earthquake is a highly earthquake prone area. I'm happy that Dr. Jaishankar raised it with Wang Yi. This is there in the readout, separate readout which came from MEA. But in 10-point understanding, there's no specific reference to this project, though there is a reference to, we have a joint mechanism on transborder rivers. Hopefully, it's discussing this matter also. But again, this is an issue which needs to be debated, discussed, and our concerns conveyed both through diplomatic channels and, in public domain, as Chinese do.
On that dam, have we lost some leverage because of our action with regard to Pakistan on with the Indus Waters Treaty? Because
No, two situations are not at all comparable. I'm aware of some people in China and sometimes also in India are raising it. It's a red herring. When it comes to India's dealings on transboundary rivers, we have been a very generous co-riparian. Even with Pakistan, despite all provocation, we are not. It's not that we stopped, flow of waters or we are interfering with it. we have put the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. But if you look at India-China transboundary rivers, uh, all we have three MOUs on sharing of data and this joint mechanism. Even these MOUs have not been renewed. We are discussing renewal for quite some time. This time also it was discussed. Uh, so how can, they are not even willing to share with us hydrographic data for lean season. At present they're only prepared to share with us emergency, data. So they're referring to our arrangements, which are far more generous. That's not at all a comparable situation.
On uh, terrorism, which is the only hint that Pakistan was discussed from our side during Mr. Wangi's visit. India, I think, was from India's side, there was a push to China saying that uh, terrorism, cross-border terrorism, must be condemned. But I think from the Chinese side, there was a watering down of this. Do you agree?
Well, India and China are not quite on the same page when it comes to transborder terrorism. Yes, Chinese position also now refers to they're opposing terrorism, all forms and manifestation, which is a good thing. But in practice, what do you see? They continue to come in the way of designation of known terrorists in 1267 Committee of UN Security Council. They continue to sort of project Pakistan as a victim of terrorism to be treated on par with other victims like India. You would have seen comments made just a couple of days ago by Chinese ambassador, and this has been their position. They even in context immediately after Pahalgam massacre took place, you had signals coming from Beijing that China supports sovereignty and territorial integrity. Pakistan support towards legitimate interests. There was no condemnation of terrorist outrage in Pahalgam until 10th May, when
That's right.
Angi spoke to National Security Advisor. So we are not quite on the same page. I'm very happy that Dr. Jaishankar, in his own forthright manner, has raised it. I'm sure you would have done it quite directly with Mr. Wangi, but we need to follow up on these concerns.
Ambassador Kantha, you have written extensively that India should not rush into détente with China. You have written in the Tribune, for instance, that India should not give the impression that it is re-engaging with China because of international headwinds that India is facing at this point, because that it will increase the perception, or will create the perception of a weak India. And that will sort of take away any advantage that India may have in its engagement with the Chinese. What is your assessment now after Wangi's visit? Did India come out strongly? Was the shadow of the Trump tariffs hanging over the visit? Was the shadow of the Pakistan collusion, China-Pakistan collusion, hanging over the visit?
There's no denying the fact that India-China relations relations are advanced in a particular geopolitical milieu. And while we always advise China that don't look at India through prism of your strategic rivalry with USA, the fact is that how two countries engage with USA does impact bilateral relations between India and China, no doubt about it. But the point I was making is that you know we are facing a degree of turbulence in our strategic relations with the USA, no doubt about it. Uh, but that should not, lead to our trying to, sort of rush towards any kind of detente with China. I'm all for detente, but that should happen, as per bilateral drivers of India-China relations. That should happen when China is more responsive to some of our concerns. Uh, in fact, I mentioned earlier that it's a desirable objective to seek stable, predictable, and constructive relationship with China. But my own experience of dealing with China is that if we, engage with them from a position of weakness or perceived vulnerability, uh, we are not in a good place. So at this point of time, any expectation that are trying to make up with China will somehow give us a more ballast or will compensate for strategic deficit in our relations with USA will be an ill-founded premise because nature of our relations with China are very different. It remains a difficult, complex relationship. Uh, s- Convergence of strategic interests at this point of time is very limited. They remain I never call China an adversary or enemy, but they do remain our primary strategic challenge. So we need to deal with them. I mean, this is no secret. We need to deal with them. As such, we need to have better relations with China, but not because we are facing some difficulties with USA.
But in a sense, this re-engagement with China precedes Trump, precedes the arrival of Donald Trump as the second term president of the US. It had started even very early last year. In fact, from the time that there was this feeling that India needs to re-engage because of its own economic concerns to kickstart manufacturing and so on. And also there was a reaching out from China as well, is my understanding, because China also faced some economic economic issues. So there was a compulsion also on the Chinese side to reach out to India. Um, so why is there this perception that as we are actually being embraced, or we are walking into China's embrace because of Trump?
No, what you said is absolutely correct. I think that there are imperatives uh, which need India and China to move towards better relations. And this is a process which has been unfolding for some time, especially since Kazan meeting between Prime Minister and President Xi. I think that needs to be progressed. Uh, it has to be calibrated normalization where you factor in, various concerns we have. It has to be realistic. This is not a process which can be sort of fast tracked, or we suddenly declare that no, we can leave those issues behind us. We can have a reset in relations. Reset is not feasible at this point of time. That's the point I have been making. I'm all for seeking much better relations with China, progressing towards normalization of ties with China. Now, why there's this perception? Uh, I'm sure our leadership is wise and mature. They do understand nature of our relations with China, and how moving closer to China doesn't quite create a leverage for us in our relations with USA. In fact, sometimes it can become a complication. Look at signaling which was coming from Chinese side. Uh, Chinese readout on Mr. Wang Yi's meeting with Prime Minister suggested that India and China had joined hands to oppose unilateral bullying. That was a barely disguised reference to the USA. Subsequently, speaking in a public seminar, you would have seen the very strong comments made by Chinese ambassador Xu Feihong, opposing bullying, and how you should not be silent in response to such bullying. I don't think this is an area where we can have a common front with China. You look at the nature of China's engagement with USA. They are fully engaged with USA. Uh, there is a strong possibility of President Trump uh, traveling to China in autumn of this year. He has been talking about a beautiful deal with President Xi Jinping. In fact, he doesn't say anything negative about.
He admires him.
Yeah, so they are working on a side deal, which may happen, may not happen, but there are a number of earlier examples on climate change, for instance. They're working very closely with us bilaterally and a basic format. In 2015, before Paris Agreement, they decided to have side deal with USA, which really sort of undermined our position. So we need to be careful that naturally they look after their interest. We need to look after our interest. Making a common cause with China on opposing, unilateral bullying by USA, I don't think that's going to take us anywhere.
Right. Also, you spoke about President Trump's visit to Beijing. Also, in the air, maybe not so much being talked about now, was the possibility that Donald Trump may visit India for the Quad Summit. Now, that is not one of his priorities at the moment, but in case that takes place, that could also impact on our relationship with China. Is that?
No, I think we have been mature enough to pursue sophisticated foreign policy where we can, engage in a very substantive manner with USA, pursuing a strategic partnership, and simultaneously we seek much better relations with China. So that has been a strength of India's foreign policy. That's what uh, is the real content of a strategic autonomy. But strategic autonomy today has to be pursued with two other key components. One, there must be strategic clarity because we are in midst of a very uncertain, unpredictable international environment. In this environment, going for tactical approaches or sometime trying to find quick fix solutions will be counterproductive. So we should have that clarity. Secondly, we must have a strategic patience when it comes to dealing with China. Um, they play the long game. Likewise, we should be prepared to play the long game. Uh, and in fact, I'll suggest even with USA, we need to show strategic patience. The current turbulence in relations, it doesn't mean that we cannot go back to much stronger footing in our relations with China, with USA. You recall what happened after Pokhran 2. Kind of problems we had with USA, kind of pressures we came under in that relationship. But we did, turn a new leaf, so to say, and we entered into a period in relationship which has lasted until recently when Mr. Trump decided to disrupt that pattern.
Going forward, what can India expect now from the Modi Xi meeting, which of course is likely to take place at Tianjin on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit? What should we expect?
We have learned our lessons from earlier high level summits, and I was also involved in some of them, especially first two, that hometown diplomacy we saw, with
Yeah.
President Xi coming to Ahmedabad and Prime Minister going to Xi'an in 2014-15, and subsequent informal summits that there are limitations on what can be achieved in these meetings. And especially this meeting is not a bilateral summit. This is a meeting taking place on the sidelines of SEO summit. I'm not saying that it should not be meaningful meeting. In fact, the Kazan meeting was likewise on sidelines of another multilateral event, but it was a substantive meeting, and it resulted in re-engagement with China. But our objectives were very sort of realistic. We re-engaged with China. If you look at the statement made by Minister External Affairs in Parliament on 3rd and 4th December, I think he laid it down in a very cogent uh, and realistic fashion that we'll move towards calibrated improvement of our relations with China, keeping in view our national security and other interests. I think that approach remains valid even today. There can be, there can be a degree of acceleration in the process of improvement, but that is predicated on China addressing some of our concerns. For instance, you referred to economic engagement. Now, economic engagement, uh, again, when it comes to trade, is the present trend acceptable? Where
You mean the imbalances?
our exports are going down. And last year, 2024, according to Chinese data, according to International Trade Center data, our deficit was $102.5 billion, and this year is like to exceed because there is a growth of bilateral trade, which is mostly imports from China. So that's one. Secondly, we have good reason to be worried about dependencies in our economic engagement with China. You're aware of what has happened recently when China has weaponized those dependencies vis-a-vis USA very successfully on question of on rare magnets. But
Even India, right?
they did the same. No, the USA, they did very successfully, which led to trade truce. But they did it with us as well. They stopped supplying certain specialized fertilizers. Earlier, they had stopped supplying tunnel boring machines where we depended on them. They asked Foxconn to withdraw Chinese nationals working on their facilities in India. I'm happy that these issues were taken up.
There's an announcement on, at least in our media, that these restrictions have been lifted.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are two things there. One, what are terms and conditions. Like rare earth magnets, any resumption will be through a process of end-use certification with very extensive documentation, where, if Chinese are not comfortable with end use, they will deny. So it will be a very qualified process. Secondly, point purpose was to convey to us our vulnerability. It's a spigot that they control. They can turn it on when they like, they can turn it off when they like. We should bear that in mind. Dependencies cannot be sort of overcome overnight, but we should have a policy which will be perhaps protracted and painful for economic de-risking. Not only vis-a-vis China, perhaps vis-a-vis some other countries which are prone to use such dependencies as instruments for putting pressure. So that should be a major objective. Likewise, when it comes to manufacturing, you refer to manufacturing. Uh, Again, we should be realistic. Do we really expect China to step in and make India a major manufacturing hub? I doubt it. Yes, they would like their companies to invest in certain areas, but value addition so far has been very limited. The restrictions on transfer of technology, which are likely to become more stringent. For instance, their EV companies are unlikely to transfer technology to India. They are in battery and electric batteries. There are regulations now imposing restrictions on any exporter technology. So Chinese are becoming very careful on this front. So yes, in areas where it's in our interest to get Chinese investment, we should do it. But we should be very clear about what will serve our interest. And we should not lose sight of economic security and national security. Chinese are always mindful of that. We should be likewise careful on that account.
So no delusions, as you said. And
No, but still, I'm not at all saying that we should not proceed with normalization of relations with China with a sense of urgency. We should do that. But as you said, no delusions. It should be based on a realistic appraisal of the context in which we are seeking normalization. It should not result in, our entering into arrangements which will in fact negatively impact on our vital interests.
thank you, Ambassador Ashok Kantha. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for sharing your time and your insights.
Thank you. Thank you.